Hey friends, today we have an author and special guest here with us. You may have heard of her, Jessica Baum. She wrote two amazing books on attachment that you will not want to miss if you haven't read them already. So stay tuned for both part 1 and part 2 of this incredible conversation that teaches us how we can heal in not only our romantic relationships, but all of our relationships from parenting to friends and otherwise. So stay tuned. Hey friends, if you enjoyed this episode, a quick 30-second share can help someone else find support and help this podcast grow. Leaving a review on Apple Podcasts boosts visibility and keeps the show alive. Your simple acts make a big difference. I'll see you back here each week for more life-changing episodes. Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today we have a special guest, Jessica Baum, with us. She's a licensed psychotherapist and founder of the Relationship Institute of Palm Beach. She specializes in trauma and attachment theory and is a certified addiction specialist with training in EMDR, CBT, DBT, and couples therapy. She helps clients worldwide build secure, healthy relationships, and her best-selling book, Anxiously Attached, has made her a trusted voice in healing attachment wounds and fostering emotional wellness. So thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself outside of your credentials and everything that you have going on.
I'm a psychotherapist. I study interpersonal neurobiology. I'm best known for Anxiously Attached. Maybe you guys have heard of it. And I have a new book coming out called Safe, an attachment-informed guide to building secure relationships. So I'm really excited about that. And I do share a lot about my personal life, interpersonal neurobiology, and I have a deep need to help the public understand attachment and how to heal attachment on a deep level. So it's really been like what's been calling me the last couple of years.
That's amazing. Do you mind sharing why you are so drawn to attachment theory and why it resonates with you?
I think when you study interpersonal neurobiology, which is how we are forming ourselves from womb to early on, and how much those early attachments literally shape our world. They shape our organs and our physical body, but they also shape our attachment needs and our nervous system and the paradigm in which we are born into, so much that they influence every choice that we make when we get older. So many people who come to me realizing that they have the same patterns happening, or they're attracted to the same type of partners, or they have trauma bonds and all those things. When you really start to understand attachment on a deep level, it starts to make sense of all of that. And it's fascinating, and it's clearly fascinating to the world because everybody is trying to learn as much as they can about attachment theory right now. And I think it's just so important.
I love learning about it, but for those listeners that don't know a lot about it, how would you say it in a nutshell? You said why it's important, but what if they know very little about it? Could you share a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. It's very well researched and studied science that started in the 1950s. And so when we're a baby, we're born into our right hemisphere. There are certain things that aren't developed. And as much as we need food and shelter, we need connection. And so the way our primary caregivers co-regulate, attune to us, build connection with us, we adapt according to them. And so there's been 4 styles. There's anxious, which I wrote the book Anxiously Attached. There's secure, there's avoidant, and then there's fearful, which is also called disorganized. And so these are just labels for different ways to adapt to your primary caregiver. And if you want, I can go into each one of them. But essentially, as we learn to adapt and modify ourselves to stay in connection, those very adaptive ways and patterns and behaviors are the same things that get deployed in our romantic or close relationship as adults. So a lot of people are like, why do I do this? Or why do I have this behavior? Or why do I people please or overextend? And if we go back to attachments theory, we can go back to your nervous system and how you lended your mom your nervous system and how you regulated her and how you self-abandoned. That's the anxious. And people really are like, oh my God, I'm starting to learn on a deeper level why my behaviors are the way they are, and forming a level of compassion around how we brilliantly adapt to stay in connection and learning to change those behaviors with a little bit of healing.
That's a great breakdown of it. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind, would you go in just briefly to those four different ones so people can get an idea of what they might be?
Sure. So, anxious attachment, a lot of us can identify with that. And we don't always fit in one. I talk about in Safe how we can move on something called the wheel of attachment. But anxious attachment, the hallmark I would say is unpredictability. So the primary caregiver's nervous system sometimes is co regulating and attuning, and sometimes the parent is just stressed out and the baby can sense that. So there's a sense of unpredictability, there's a sense of abandonment that's conscious. And so this makes up a bulk of people who love reading Anxiously Attached, but people who sacrifice their needs, can over attune to the room. I'll know what you need before I need, because that's what they did to survive. They literally left their body to attune to their mother or primary caregiver's body to sense what they needed. And that's how they stayed in connection. The other extreme is avoidant attachment. And I talk about how these two are attracted to each other. But avoidant attachment parents tend to be more left hemisphere shifted and they're more focused on tasks and taking care of the baby, but they're not as emotionally connected. Because they're not as emotionally connected to themselves, they can't attune in a particular way. So the baby unfortunately learns not to reach out, not to ask for help. Later, these individuals show up as really independent, struggle with vulnerability. Those are the hallmarks of avoidant, and they feel completely abandoned. So annihilation is a word at the core of them. Then there's disorganized, which the public refers to as fearful avoidant. And that's a baby who, so we need connection. Like we can't survive connection. It's like water to us as babies. So if our parent is really neglectful or dangerous or violent, we get stuck in this a fear state where I need to connect with you, but I'm also terrified of you at the same time. That or you're completely gone and neglectful, and I have no one to orient to. So the baby learns these fear states of being trapped. I need, but I can't. And I'm always constantly scared. And that can lead later in life to very push pull dynamics that can be very confusing for an individual. And I would say the hallmark for that is terror. So those are the three insecure types. Then you have secure attachment. It's not that securely attached people are like having it's so much better, but they have an easier time getting their needs met. They have an easier time getting close. They have an easier time with space. They have an easier time coming back to homeostasis. So when they get dysregulated, they come back into regulation factor because their parents were more present, they were more attuned, they were more there in a way where the baby and the adult feel inherently, I'm going to get my needs met. And ironically, they tend to attract people who will meet their needs. So these ways of adapting early on, most people aren't conscious that this happened, and our parents don't do it on purpose. But their nervous system and their parts tend to intergenerationally flow down through many factors. So when you understand attachment theory on a deep level, you can start to put these pieces together.
I love that. Thanks for breaking that down for us. So then the question that I get asked a lot by clients is, okay, now I know my attachment style. I've taken a quiz. I've done this and that. I've read some books, listened to some podcasts. How do I get securely attached? And you're kind of the lead on this. How do you break that down for them?
Yeah, I mean, it was Safe, my new book, or I don't know when this will be released, literally walked you through how to earn security. And you need a lot of holding. And there's a nervous system kind of understanding of when we're in these regress states. How do we meet these states differently? You need to internalize secure people all over again. And there's a whole process towards earn security, but part of it is re-experiencing the original wounds and receiving what you didn't get at the time of the wound. So if you were abandoned, you need to be held. If you were ashamed, you need to be accepted, right? And so we also go into the body because for those of you listening, all your attachment wounds and trauma are stored in your body, not in your head. So a good therapist or coach, or what I talk about in the book, is finding your anchors, is holding the sensational experiences that you're experiencing in your body around attachment wounds. So we want to build a window of tolerance and a level of holding for your soma, for your body. You can't heal attachment logically. You need to heal it through the body.
Is there any pointers you could give to start that process?
The best pointer is just bringing conscious awareness first. When your belly drops or tightens, or there's a knot in your belly, or your chest is tight. I was talking to a client yesterday. She couldn't breathe. And I talk about this in the book, but that's implicit memory. So we don't store memory like movies when we're little. We don't have that part of our brain developed. We store memory as sensation. So when you're fighting with your partner or your friend and your body is on fire or you're shutting down, or you're having these sensational responses, that is memory. So when I'm working with clients and we start to feel into sensations, it takes them a while sometimes, but to click in like, this is early memory. This is literally how we store memory. We don't store memory the way that you think in the beginning. And once they start to understand that their body's lighting up or something's happening in their nervous system, they start to relate to it differently. So we can start to tend to it differently. We can bring it to people who have the capacity to hold it versus maybe parents who didn't. We can speak to it like as a younger self. We can be kind to ourselves when things are lighting up. And we stop looking for a solution like, oh, this person is going to fix me. And we reoriented, wow, this person is waking up something very young inside of me. So all those shifts start to happen and it literally changes your level of consciousness. It's very hard to share that. Like it's an experience. So I would say if you can hear one thing on this podcast is if your gut is tight or your chest is tight, like that's early memory. That's how we're wired to store memory until explicit memory develops. Around 4, it starts to develop, and then we get both kinds of memory, but the body is always storing memory, and implicit memory is much stronger than explicit memory.
Yeah. Interesting. So, do you have any examples that you can think of? Maybe one of the more prevalent types of attachment style of what that would look like in somebody. Maybe it's a client you could share about.
A good example is, okay, so I'll give a client from the book. So Miranda, I forgot what chapter she's in, got deep abandonment wounds. She is a client and her boyfriend started to ignore her. And her boss at work was also starting to be like very hypercritical of her. And she started having like IBS problems and sleepless nights. So these two very important men in her life were clearly, their behaviors were changing. And so she came to me, but her symptoms were so extreme. Like she was barely functioning. Granted, if you're listening, if your boyfriend's acting weird and your boss is being mean to you, like it does suck in the here and now. But the symptoms were so extreme in her. And we started to dive into her history. And it turned out that when she was born, 2 years later, she had a sister who was born who died of cancer. And we were able to go back and start to be with the part of her that was abandoned at a very early age by parents who had to literally tend to take care of and grieve of another child who was being lost in her home. So a lot of things that were coming up for her were like pre-verbal experiences in her body. So we had to build some compassion there. She was able to work through a lot with her boss, and I sent her and her boyfriend to a couples counselor, someone on my team, and we were able to work through it. But a lot of her experiential things that were happening in her body were really tied also to early development. So what's happening in the here and now carries a lot of weight, and it can activate early things that we're not even conscious of. But when they live so big in our body, we know there's a form of memory attached.
That's a great example and helps illustrate what that would look like. What about another one? Can you think what it would show up like for any of the other attachment styles?
I identify with this, but like people with more an avoidant attachment style, when they enter therapy or I call them anchors or relationships where they're being attuned to and emotional presence is being held and we're with them, like that right hemisphere joining of being with. Sometimes what happens is they realize how much they didn't get as a kid because now they're finally receiving a real presence from someone and really someone interested with what's going on inside them and is tracking them and is with them. They're like, oh my God, I didn't have parents that did this for me. And then there's a huge grief process around no wonder why I'm like struggling or emotionally, or no wonder why I'm a workaholic, or no wonder why I can't connect in certain ways. I didn't think of my parents as people who abandoned me. They were there. They got everything done. They loved me. but they didn't offer me this emotional presence that I'm now experiencing in certain relationships, which brings vulnerability, but it also brings an awareness of, wow, I was abandoned. And that is a very profound thing. I know I realized that once I started doing deep work and someone was really with me for the first time, like really with me. I was like, oh man, I wish I had this as a kid. I wish I had someone who had the capacity to be really with me. But often parents, they love us and they're workaholics and they're focusing on success and they're doing the best they can. And they didn't have parents that could be really with them. So they can't give us what they didn't receive. And we don't realize what we didn't get until we start receiving it.
I love that part of it. Just kind of normalizes like, yeah, we had these parents that couldn't meet all of our needs, that maybe it was a generational thing. They likely experienced something like that themselves. And how do you help clients not get in that space where they're kind of stuck, maybe as victims or blaming and just like, I didn't get this, so this is just how I am, and move forward?
It's never about blame. And I really dive into this in the book, but it's about intergenerational trauma and understanding that most parents are doing the best they can with what they got. They have their nervous system. Many of our parents, I don't know what age the primary listeners, healing your intergenerational wounds and attachment bonds, it was not available. It was not something that people even talked about. And mind you, it's not an easy process. And so when I look at my parents, at first I did get angry. And I think not getting your needs met and understanding that this has caused some suffering in your life, I think a valid response is anger. I remember getting angry at my mom one time. I regressed to the point where I remembered what it was like to be in the crib. And I was like, oh my God, like this was terrifying. But then when you move through the process later in the process, you understand that they're doing the best that they can. And you can heal through internal parents and things like that, which I dive into. But I think part of the process is recognizing and awakening to this stuff. And then you don't stay there. Like you're not like a victim that stays there. You move through the process and you start to see your parents, not just as parents, but as people with their own wounds and their own things to work through. And that's part of the evolution of like becoming an adult.
So then what about parents that are like, oh my gosh, I think I'm doing that to my kids right now, and they're older? Is there any hope of turning that around and giving them a more secure attachment, or is it maybe a little too late as they're further on?
It's never too late. You know what? The thing that we learn about brain science is that neuroplasticity is happening throughout our lives. It's not, doesn't it stop? Something called rupture and repair. We can always repair with our kids. And the more healing that you do, the more that funnels into your relationship. So the more you can experience someone holding space for you and being there emotionally, the more practice you get and the more you're able to do that for others. And it becomes this like beautiful butterfly effect. So yeah, I help many people who have kids that are older repair deeply and work through how to navigate that. Absolutely.
That gives them hope, which is always nice because, yeah, you hear about those formative years and you're like, oh man, do they have any hope? I don't know if they do, but I love that you say it's never too late and that we can repair in those ways. Do you have any personal, if you wouldn't mind, stories that could help us even better understand this? Like why you felt compelled to write this book, why it speaks to you so much? Anything you're willing to share?
I think that I'm not like a natural born author, but I think because I've suffered my own life, like through attachment wounds and picking particular partners, which I talk about how our implicit world chooses the familiar a lot. It all just fascinates me as a human. And I think, yes, I'm a professional, but I think even when you read my books, it's like I'm a human who has suffered a great deal. And through my suffering and my learning, I just know so many other people are suffering in the ways that I have. It's not because I'm a phenomenal writer. It's not actually because I want to be out there in the world as an author. It's that I just deeply resonate with attachment trauma and how much attachment trauma can make your life miserable. I mean, and you could feel crazy. I remember in the beginning of my first book, I was like, I thought I was crazy. Like, I just literally thought I was crazy. And I remember I was 19, so I read the book Facing Codependency, and I was like, wow, there's finally a book that I can grab onto. And through all my deep neuroscience studying, it's not codependency, it's attachment trauma. It all comes down to attachment trauma. And I just felt like I needed to get that out to the world. I needed to help other people who were suffering in the way that I am. And that's been the major drive. I would say that when I finished Anxiously Attached, I was in a relationship, and the person that I was with, who I love deeply, didn't want to do the healing. Like, they had done some with me, and I thought they would forever be on this healing, evolving path with me. At one point, they were like, this is too hard and I can't do it. And I was very upset because I was like, what? This is what we signed up for. And so I had to leave that relationship. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life. And I had to continue to do the work. And as I continued to do the work, more of my abandonment wounds came up, more of my trauma came up. So the birth of Safe came from a very humbling experience of, I thought I had it figured out, and life unfolds the way it's going to unfold. And my work, my own personal healing, was still like many years. And not that anyone's ever healed, but I'm over the real deep stuff. So I think so. The birth of Safe was that. And I dived even deeper into studying interpersonal neurobiology. So I love my first book, but my second book it just takes 5 levels deeper because I went through so much in between each book. And I thought it was important to be vulnerable about that and really share from a transparent place. And I think it's hard to be a professional because people are like, you should have this all figured out. And I'm like, I am like right there with you. I am doing my healing work and I don't know what's going to unfold for me. All I can do is stay very committed to the work.
I appreciate you sharing that vulnerability too. And any leader, professional, a challenging thing for sure. Maybe the pressure you put on yourself, but even others that, like, yeah, you've got it all figured out. You're trying to navigate it yourself. But you just said that in between those two books, there was so much more healing and these next layers, these levels that came out as you went through your own personal experiences. And so we get a taste of that as we read that, as that's released. So I'm very excited about that. Do you have any favorite parts or maybe other people reading it that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
I mean, I think as you're reading it, you're really understanding how memory plays a part in the big pieces. How do we move away from what's familiar and move towards what is healthy, what is going to be more fulfilling? And I dive deep into trauma bonds. People like to hear that word, but really it's memory that matches another person's memory in a particular way that you get stuck in a pattern where you think, if my partner could just act differently, or if they could just do this differently, and you miss the piece of what is really being awakened inside of me. It's not a book that says it's them. It's a book that says, let's use them as a portal into you. And there's a lot of story in the book. And there's in both my books, but in Safe, I give free somatic exercises in the book. But then if you go to my website, I download them separately. And part of the work is to go into your body. And so I want you to be able to record them and be able to continue to do this work outside of the audiobook or the hard copy book. So I give you that resource as well. I think the most important part of the book for me is I want people to understand the science around healing. You don't pick up a self-help book and heal. Like, there is science around other people's nervous systems. There is the science around particular environments and particular things that you need in order to move through this. I think as a young adult in my 20s, I read every freaking self-help book I could get my hands on, but I was missing a very important message. Was I needed someone to re-witness and experience certain things with me in order to move the trauma out of the body up into the right hemisphere and integrate it into the left. So I really want people to understand the science so they're not like stuck in their apartment trying to do this solo mission, which is like opposite of how we're neurologically wired to actually heal the trauma. And I want people to understand that this isn't woo-woo in child work. There is deep neuroscience in this book that you're going to really walk away understanding how to get there. And it's a journey. It's not a quick fix, which a lot of people in our culture want. They want like how to change your life in 3 steps. But this will set you on the path and hopefully give you enough of an experience to start to understand your own direction and your own inherent wisdom and what you need in order to feel more secure inside.
Absolutely.
But listen, deep healing happens in romantic relationships as well. just because mine didn't provide me a full container of that. I'm a couples counselor. I do imago therapy. So this work can absolutely be done with your partner. You both can read this book and do a lot of this deep work together. So healing happens in healing relationships. Wounding happens in relationships. So it doesn't have to be done with a therapist. I talk about finding your anchors. A lot of therapists don't know how to hold deep space. And hopefully, I hope this is a tool for them, but we're all in different places. But I talk about what that actually means and how you can find safe people to hold this experience and to heal with. And it doesn't have to be a therapist, but there are certain qualifications, like their nervous system has to be in a state of safety enough of the time. They have to be willing to be present with you and not try to fix you. So I go into how to find someone like that because not everybody can afford to go to that level of therapy every week. It's expensive. So I give people, this is what that other person needs to be. And I talk about being co-anchors. So you could even co-anchor with another person. So there's a lot of options besides go to therapy. And I hope these people bring this book. If you're in therapy, I hope you bring the work to this book to your therapist and it becomes a companion for you there.
Yeah, beautifully said. So that healing happens in those healing relationships. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Jessica Baum is incredible and a leading expert on attachment. Stay tuned for part 2 in our next episode. If you haven't already, please go onto Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. We need those reviews to keep getting seen. We appreciate you doing so and sharing these episodes with a friend. So thank you so much for spreading the word and helping others become their best selves. Until next time. Welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. I'm Kendra Nielsen, wife, mom, and licensed therapist. Do you ever feel like you're doing everything right, but you're still exhausted and empty? Did you think life, marriage, and parenting would be simpler and more rewarding? Sometimes you just want to crawl back into bed and lose yourself in screen time and chocolate, rather than face that personal or family stress. You are not alone. This podcast helps you break free of the rat race and build a richer, more meaningful life, flourishing incrementally and realistically, improving your mental health and wellness, and living with deeper purpose beyond the mundane, no matter where you are in life's journey.